Hey everyone, it's Miss H, and today we're going to be talking about types of reactions. Now, in order to talk about types of reactions, there are a few key vocabulary terms we need to know first. A chemical reaction is what happens when one or more substances undergo a chemical change to produce one or more new substances. Basically, what this means is if I add two things together, or even having one thing by itself undergoing a spontaneous change, it creates something new. The reactants are the substances that we start the reaction with. Those are the things that get changed or undergo the chemical change. So those are usually not going to be seen in the final product. The products are the end results of the chemical change, the substances that you end with, what gets created. When we write a chemical reaction, we use an arrow to represent moving from the reactants to the products, and we usually read this arrow as yields. But we can also think of it as the word creates, generates, becomes, makes, any of those sorts of things if that works better in your head. But yields is going to be the one that you're most likely to see on a quiz test, anything that you're going to see written. So let's look at the types of reactions. The first type of reaction is a synthesis reaction. Synthesis reactions have multiple reactants that create a single product. That single product is kind of the key way to identify a synthesis reaction. So our generic format for this would be A plus B yields AB. Again, notice that you do see both reactants in the final product, but they are not the same thing as what you started with because they are now combined. An example from non-chemistry that might help you understand this better is making a peanut butter and jelly sandwich. So your reactants are bread, peanut butter, and jelly, and your final product is a peanut butter and jelly sandwich that you can still see the bread, the peanut butter, and the jelly in, so you can see all of the components, but now they're all together as one thing. Our second type of reaction is a decomposition reaction. In a decomposition reaction, you start with a single reactant and create multiple products. Again, single reactant here is your key way to identify a decomposition reaction. The generic format for this would be CD yields C plus D. So again, this time we are starting with a single reactant and creating multiple products, but you can still see all of the components in the final product from the original reactant. An example here would be a tree that gets cut down and produces wood and leaves. So the tree contains both wood and leaves all combined together, and when you break it down into its parts, you have wood and leaves that are two separate components. The third type of reaction we have is what's called a single replacement reaction. In a single replacement reaction, you have one element and one compound on each side of the reaction. So one element plus one compound creates a different element and a different compound. The reason it's called a single replacement reaction is because something is solo on each side. One thing is single. The element is by itself on each side. Our generic format for this would be xy plus z yields zy plus x. On these reactions, it is almost always a ionic compound plus a metal, or a metal plus an ionic compound. So it's almost always the metals that are going to switch out. But that is not always the case. An example here that we can look at. So you have Amy and Brad arrive together and Chelsea arrives by herself. And then Amy leaves by herself and Chelsea and Brad leave together. So what we've done here is we have switched out the one person from the group. In this case, Amy and Chelsea switch places, with Brad always being attached to one of them. The fourth type of reaction is a double replacement reaction. A double replacement reaction is where you have two compounds on the reactants and two different compounds on the product. So your key way to identify this is that everything is a compound. You have compound plus compound yields different compound plus different compound. So you have all four compounds. The generic format for this is RT plus SU yields RU plus ST. Again, you can see that the second letters switched. So one half of the compound stays the same and the other half of the compound switches with the other one. A generic way to think of this one, or another example to think of for this one, would be you buy two pairs of shoes. One pair of shoes when you buy them is red and has blue laces in it. The other pair of shoes that you buy is blue and has red shoelaces in it. You want your laces to match your shoes, so you take the laces out of both pair of shoes and put them in the other pair. So now you end up with a pair of red shoes that has red laces and a pair of blue shoes that has blue laces, so that everything is nice and monochromatic and matching. Another example you can think of this is a double date gone wrong. So couple A arrives together, couple B arrives together, but then at the end, half of couple A leaves with half of couple B, and half of couple B leaves with half of couple A. So they've switched partners and are leaving with somebody different. That is a good example for a double replacement reaction. It's also important to note that you'll sometimes hear single replacement and double replacement called single displacement and double displacement reactions, but for the purposes of our class, we're going to stick with the words replacement. The last type of reaction we want to look at here is combustion. In a combustion reaction, it's a little bit different than the other types. Instead of looking for how much do we start with or what kind of compounds do we start with, what we're looking at specifically are that the products are carbon dioxide and water. So combustion reactions, something reacts with oxygen and produces water and carbon dioxide. So your products will always be H2O or HOH, you'll see one of those two, with CO2. So it'd be like CO2 plus H2O or CO2 plus HOH. A combustion reaction that you're all familiar with is cellular respiration, which is the opposite of photosynthesis. So with cellular respiration, you have sugar plus oxygen yields carbon dioxide and water. That's a more complex one than what we typically deal with in this class, but it's a good example to think of for combustion. It's also really a good example because combustion doesn't necessarily mean explosion or fire like what we think of. So a combustion reaction, again, is going to be something plus oxygen makes water and carbon dioxide, and water will either be H2O or HOH. It can be written both ways. So this slide goes through the steps that I personally go through to identify the type of reaction that I have. So when I look at a reaction, the first thing I look at is see if there is a plus on the reactant side. If there is not, then I already know I have a decomposition reaction. If there is, then I look and see is there a plus on the product side. If there's not, then I know I have a synthesis reaction. If there is, then I go down and look and see is there an element that's by itself on each side. If there is, then it's a single replacement reaction. If there's not, then I look and I see are the products carbon dioxide and water. If they are, then it's combustion, and if they aren't, then it's double replacement. So this is just kind of a dichotomous key of sorts to help figure out what type of reaction you have. So you can either look at those key identifiers, the single reactant, single product, lone elements, everything being a compound, or the products of carbon dioxide and water, or you can go through something like this key to help you figure out which type of reaction you're looking at. The other way that we classify reactions is by whether they give off or need heat to occur. So if heat is added on the reactant side, meaning that you need to add heat to make that reaction occur, we call that an endothermic reaction. So remember that endo means enter or into, and therm means heat. So this means that heat is entering the reaction. What this means is that if you were to feel the test tube or the beaker that this reaction was taking place in, it would actually feel cold to the touch because it would be taking heat from the environment, in this case your hand, to make the reaction occur. If heat is on the product side, then that means that it's giving off heat, and we call that an exothermic reaction. Remember that exo means exit or leave, and again, therm means heat, so this is heat is leaving the reaction. So again, if you were to feel the test tube or the beaker that this was taking place in, it would feel warm to the touch because it's giving off heat, so it's going to be hotter than your hand. So again, we can classify reactions two ways. We classify them by what their reactants and products are, and then we classify them by whether they give off or receive heat. And those are two completely separate things. So I can have something that is both a synthesis reaction and an endothermic reaction, or I can have something that is both a decomposition reaction and an exothermic reaction. I can have one of those first 5 reactions and then one of these 2 types of reactions as well. And it can be both at the same time. So hopefully this helped you understand types of reactions better, and I hope you have a great day.